Hey there, art nerds. Today we are taking a look at this Schpirerr watercolor palette masquerading as an Artify watercolor palette because Schpirerr frequently does white label product deals. So I'm really excited to unbox and swatch this palette for you guys today because I've had some really positive experiences with Schpirerr in the past and I have high hopes for this palette. We have had a lot of losers in this student grade showdown, but I'm pretty confident that today's watercolors are going to be a winner. While these say Artify on the front, I am pretty confident that this is actually a palette of Schpirerr watercolors. Schpirerr is a brand that offers OEM and ODM services, so you will see their watercolors sold by a lot of white labeling companies, particularly on Amazon. So the reason I figured that these were Schpirerr watercolors is I was doing some research for another watercolor palette and I saw these under the Schpirerr name, and since I have tried other Schpirerr products here in the past and really liked them, I thought it would be fun to try a more straightforward Schpirerr watercolor palette. Now, this is one of two Schpirerr watercolor reviews that are going to be part of this student grade showdown. I have a 48 standard size, standard half pan set coming in from AliExpress as well. This is more billed as a plein air palette. So while we've talked about some really wild and wonderful Schpirerr watercolor palettes here on the channel, like that weird watercolor fan and the cool watercolor watch and that collapsible watercolor cup, I think one of my favorites has to be this Schpirerr unfolding watercolor palette. Now this thing takes up a lot of desk space. It's basically the same size as a 9x12 watercolor pad when it's unfolded. So this is definitely not a space-saving watercolor palette. But what really impressed me, if I can get it actually to open up, what really impressed me was not only the novelty of this like folding screen design, but the quality of the paints inside. So with this palette, you don't really get a whole lot of paint. It's in these really thin little chiclets and they don't seem to be refillable, but the quality is pretty good for a student grade palette and the price point isn't too bad. So after reviewing this, I knew I wanted to try out more Schpirerr watercolors, see what other innovative palettes they have to offer, because if there's one thing I really enjoy here on the channel, it's when watercolor gets weird and kind of innovative. Even if those attempts fall kind of short, I still really appreciate the effort at trying to find something new and something distinctive. So you guys have probably seen this palette and the folding palette and the watch palette sold under a million different names. I know Jerry's Artorama is carrying the watch palette under their creative mark name, and Jane Davenport has licensed it as well, and I forgot what she calls it, but you know, it is a popular company to white label from, and I have zero interest in reviewing all the different iterations because, you know, I would actually rather just focus on getting them from Schpirerr, paying a little bit less money since I'm not paying for that quote-unquote brand name price, and just focusing on how the palettes themselves differ. So let me get this thing folded up. I'm going to make sure that I link the unbox and swatch and the field test for this and the other Schpirerr palettes that we've already talked about. I'm also going to have a clip of the field tests for this coming up right now and just kind of recap my thoughts on this palette just to refresh your memory so you don't have to watch the whole thing if you don't want to. So here are some clips from the field test for the Schpirerr watercolor palette. And this palette really surprised me because it seems like it's kind of a gimmick palette, but it really handled wet into wet diffused color and loads of layering, just layer after layer with no problem at all. It got to the point where I kind of forgot I was even field testing this palette. I just started painting and enjoying painting, which really surprised me. I figured this would be kind of a gimmick. I expected the paints to handle kind of like student grade watercolors, and they didn't. They handled much more like professional grade watercolors than I really expected them to, or than they had any right to really handle. So I really enjoyed this field test, and I really enjoyed using this palette. And this is what inspired me to seek out more Schpirerr watercolor products and give them a try as well, and to talk about this palette as much as I do so that other people can find it. So before we dive too deep into the review, I'm going to explain two things. This cut on my hand is from cooking Thanksgiving dinner. It's healing quite nicely, but I'm just kind of keeping it safe and protected until it's fully healed. The clickety-clack sound that you guys hear in the background is my husband working a few feet away. We share a workspace. It doesn't bother me. Hopefully it doesn't bother you guys. And I think that covers our bases. So in today's unbox and swatch, I'm not going to talk about Schpirerr too much since I have reviewed several of their products in the past. They're a Chinese watercolor company. They have some really fun ideas, as I've mentioned to you guys earlier, and frequently we're seeing more and more of their products carried on Amazon and beyond under other companies' names. So this is an Artify white label. I have actually reviewed the Artify brush markers about a year ago, and I was pretty happy with the quality. So it seems like when Artify is white labeling, it seems like they are selecting from pretty good companies. This particular style of set is available in two sizes, 24, we're taking a look at the 24 today, and 48, and this is designed to be a field style set. So it's going to look a lot like the Schpirerr Farben palette, and I'm kind of excited about how those two are going to compare against each other. Artify is also white labeling the unusual folding palette that we just took a look at, although the one I have here is from Schpirerr itself. So it seems like they like to use Schpirerr for their watercolor needs. And other than that, there's not much. Oh yeah, I'm so sorry. So I got this on Amazon about a month ago during Hurricane Ida evacuation, and I paid around $22.48 for it. Now, I would recommend that you utilize Honey. We don't have any kind of relationship whatsoever. I just use them to help me figure out when is the cheapest point in an art supply, and they send me a notification that, oh hey, it's cheaper than it's been historically, and that's when I go ahead and buy it. So utilizing codes and services like Honey, plus the amazing support of my fantastic patrons, allows me to be able to afford to review supplies like this for you guys, because I have zero relationship with Artify other than those brush markers. They did send me those brush markers to review with the caveat that it would be as unbiased a review as possible. I have no working relationship with them or with Schpirerr, so all opinions are my own, but I think I'm gonna like this palette because historically I've really liked Schpirerr products. So inside our Flimsy Cardboard Box, we have our plastic watercolor palette that is branded Artify Art Supplies 24 color with two water brushes that are not particularly branded at all. The box says that it's going to come with a snap lid cover, a removable mixing palette, 24 assorted 1/2 pan colors, 3, we're missing one, or maybe it's inside, 3 water brushes, 2 cool sponges. Now, that's very subjective. What are they cool in terms of temperature? Are they cool in terms of attitude? A built-in ring finger, and then on the back of the box, thank you, Schpirerr, you make my life so much easier. They have the color numbers and names. They also have light fast information, but they don't seem to have any of the pigment information. I will try to dig up the pigment information for you guys, but you guys know how it's been with the student grade showdown. Pigment information is usually pretty scarce on the ground, but I promise I'll see what I can do. Artify 24 watercolor field sketch set is created by special concentrating technology, featuring in small volume with high capacity. Assorted sunproof, no fading colors, easy to blend, quick to dry. Less space, less cost, more joy. Great travel set. Enjoy transparent, vibrant, and fabulous watercolor at home or while traveling. And here are instructions on how to use watercolors. Speaking of, if you are interested in learning how to paint yourself, I've got some great playlists with watercolor tutorials ranging from absolute beginner to full-fledged watercolor illustration tutorials. And if you're new here, hi, I'm Becca. I'm a watercolor comic artist and illustrator. I paint the watercolor comics 7-inch Kara. You guys can read it for free as a webcomic at 7inchkara.com. So I disclose this because I think it's actually pretty important that you guys know my background, because that always colors how I look at these watercolors. I use watercolors literally every day. I'm always painting something, and I really look for watercolors that are very transparent, really allow for glazing, allow for beautiful wet into wet mixes, and don't turn muddy on me. That's usually my big caveats. I'm also an art educator. That's one of the reasons I'm doing this student grade showdown. People are always asking me what kind of affordable watercolors I can recommend, and I wanted to have some good ones on hand that I could suggest for people who are not quite ready to pay Daniel Smith prices. So if you are interested in learning more about watercolor, you are in the right place. I hope you guys will check the description down below. Also in the description will be my show notes for this review. And then they explain how to take care of a water brush. I'll go ahead and read that for you guys. Rinse the brush to keep it clean, drain the water from the reservoir, and dry the brush tip. And that is legit, because I used to think you could just leave water in these things and they mold. And once the mold gets into the little brush that's right up here, it's ruined. You're not going to salvage that. Remove the nib cap to preserve brush tip when not used for a long period of time. That would allow it to actually dry fully. Keep small parts out of children's reach. Attention! This product's shelf life remains over 2 years. So I guess it means it can sit for 2. That is the very first time I've encountered like a food safety warning. And then on the back of the box, we have some customer care information. Since they white labeled this, I am not super sure that they're going to be able to answer all my questions. So I'm going to try to do digging first before I actually ask them. So the layout of this set, the plastic palette itself is so much like the Sakura Koi and the Schpirerr Farben palettes. I actually happen to have both of them on hand today. So when we do our big comparative discussion, I'll be sure to have those so we can talk about them. I actually happen to like this palette format. I don't have a problem with it. I love that we have all this mixing space. I love that you could use this as a mixing space or to hold a small watercolor block, so like pochette style. I like that this posts in several different iterations. I don't mind the cartridge system. Let me pull that out. We did have some breakage right here. I could not tell you if that's how Amazon delivered it or if it came from following me from 3 different houses. So I'll just chalk that one up. But this is the only, no, this one's broken and this one's broken, but they're not super duper broken. They are extruded watercolor pans that were then put into these half pans. You can very easily pop these half pans out. I'll be a little bit salty if these are exactly the same paints as the Shapiro Farben, just because I really hate reviewing duplicates of things. But this is a very popular common palette style, so I'm just going to assume that Schpirerr is just buying their palettes from somebody else, because that's a way to save money and focus your costs on, instead of developing a new palette, you can focus that cost attention to your paints. So we have the 2 sponges. I don't like using these. Another disclaimer, I don't like using water brushes. So while I will talk about the quality of these water brushes a little bit, I'm going to do most of my, if not all of my swatching using a regular watercolor brush. And I'm also going to be doing my swatching on cotton rag watercolor paper. So these seem to be pretty standard water brushes. You get 3 of them. You get a large, a medium, and an extra fine. I do like that. I wish they came with those little black bobbins that allow you to like store them in 2 separate pieces with water in the reservoir ready to go. If you are traveling with this as a field test, this is super nitpicky. You can't actually fit all 3 of your brushes in the palette itself, but I mean, these kind of brushes don't really take up a lot of space. The ring on the back, pretty standard. I'm not a plein air painter myself, although when I do, I like to use the Schpirerr collapsible watercolor cup or the watch. So I guess I'm already like primed to do plein air painting with Schpirerr. But I'm more of like a in the studio or in one space kind of a painter. I used to do commissions, watercolor commissions at conventions, and this is the size of palette I'd use because I'd use the Sakura Koi palette. So I think comparing this to Sakura Koi and to Schpirerr Farben is a very natural comparison. The colors in this set are 003 white with a light fast rating of 3, 067 skin color with a light fast rating of 2, 052 lemon yellow with a light fast rating of 2, 056 cadmium yellow, and it's a hue, with a light fast rating of 3, 024 yellow orange with a light fast rating of 2, 076 with a light fast rating of 3, and that would be orange, 025 orange red with a light fast rating of 2, 014 with a light fast rating of 3, that'd be vermilion, 017 with a light fast rating of 3, that'd be cadmium red light, also a hue, 022 with a light fast rating of 3, alizarin crimson, 032 with a light fast rating of 2, permanent rose, 176 with a light fast rating of 3. They're calling this mauve, but the swatch on the back is like a dark blue, and this looks like a dioxine purple. 143 with a light fast rating of 2, cerulean blue. 145 with a light fast rating of 3, and we also have a chip in that one. That would be marine blue. 149 with a light fast rating of blue. That would be Prussian blue, and that's the one that really's got some chips. 114 with a light fast rating of 2, that'd be permanent green. 117 with a light fast rating of 2, that'd be olive green. 092 with a light fast rating of 3 would be chrome green. 116 with a light fast rating of 2 would be hooker's green. 071 with a light fast rating of 3 would be yellow ochre. 197 with a light fast rating of 3 would be what they're calling pale red. This is a Venetian red, typically. 194 with a light fast rating of 3 would be burnt umber. 231 with a light fast rating of 3 would be Payne's gray. And finally, 004 with a light fast rating of 3 would be ivory black. So unfortunately, as of this time, and that might totally change, I cannot find pigment information for Schpirerr. As always, I can find a boatload of reviews, which is wonderful, but no pigment information, which is kind of frustrating. I review a lot of their stuff, so I may have to reach out to them and see if I can get them to share their pigment information, because that would also kind of give us some idea of how opaque these colors should be based on the colors included, and just kind of give us a general idea of what we can expect from these paints. So for today's unbox and swatch, ads with pretty much every unbox and swatch, I do this to be consistent. I am going to be swatching on Blick Studio Cold Press 100% cotton rag watercolor paper. This is a block bound paper. When I'm doing these kind of reviews, I like to work with cotton rag paper because frankly, it gives these paints the best chance they have to shine. So I think it is the fairest review I could possibly give them. When I'm painting my watercolor comics, I do like to paint on Canson Mont Marte, which is a cellulose paper, but when I'm painting watercolor illustrations, I prefer to work with a cotton rag paper. So at this point, I probably am painting on cotton rag more often than I am on cellulose. And the reason I paint on Canson Mont Marte is economy, B, it runs through my printer and is the right scale for comic pages, and C, it actually handles quite well for a cellulose paper, and a lot of what you can do on it, you can do on a cotton rag, so it's one of the better cellulose papers, although it's getting increasingly difficult to find here in the US. So, to test for opacity, I am going to use a Copic marker. I went out and bought a chow just for this. So this is my official watercolor swatching Copic chow that is going to live with my swatching supplies. And I think I'm going to do, this is a 24 set. I think I'm going to do 2 rows of 12 here on this block. And hopefully that should also leave us some room where we can do our color mixing tests on this. And then I only have to pull out one additional sheet for our wet into wet test. So when I am doing color swatches, I'm looking for a few different properties. I'm looking at opacity, I'm looking for granulation, I'm looking for how the colors wash out in clean water. And I don't actually talk about this a whole lot, but for the student grade showdown and for pretty much at this point forward, all of my watercolor reviews, I'm going to be using purified water. I live in Southeast Louisiana. We have hard water down here, and I just want to remove the fact that there's minerals in the water that could cause scaling or buildup from the judgment equation. So really trying to give every set of paint as fair a chance as possible. And I think everything in the student grade showdown has been done using purified water, and it's my goal to continue using purified water henceforth. So we're going to be looking for opacity, we're going to be looking at how they wash out, we're going to be looking at granulation, we're going to later be looking at liftability. I want to see varying degrees of opacity because theoretically we've got pigments with varying degrees of natural opacity themselves. I want to see varying degrees of liftability for a similar reason. I want to see varying degrees of granulation for the same reason as well. So enough with the preamble. I'm going to get my pad of paper set up and we're going to get to swatching. The official Schpirerr website is www.schpirerr-art.cn. I'll have that for you guys down in the show notes below. And those of you who read my blog or used to read my blog might remember the touch markers that I reviewed a million years ago. Schpirerr makes those. That was kind of surprising. They also make portfolio cases, watercolors, watercolor brush pins, water-based markers, fine liners, acrylics and acrylic markers, refill inks, and oil colors. They make a lot of stuff. And as a side note, when I'm Googling Schpirerr watercolors, why does their site not come up first? Reviewing art supplies has gotten a lot more challenging over the past couple years. A bunch of YouTube reviews pop up first, and you have to really dig to search for the term, and you have to be kind of search term savvy as well, and that's just no good. That's more of a complaint at Google than at anybody else, and I probably will be switching to DuckDuckGo after this. So talking about the Schpirerr website, some of their sets look really interesting and promising. Unfortunately, I haven't really seen the wooden full pan cases on AliExpress or Amazon. The ones on their site are the ones I'd really like to try. They look really cool, and I haven't seen anything quite like them before. And I've mentioned before that Schpirerr makes some kind of weird watercolor palettes. This is one, so there's a really cool one I'd like to try that I'm going to link for you guys down in the show notes. And they also have some tube watercolors that seem pretty promising. I also have a link to the site I'm reviewing today down in the description as well. Inside is a different water brush, but otherwise they're identical. And the email is listed on the site, but not their pigment info. So I shot them an email asking about it. And I'm actually doing the voiceover for this now a couple weeks after I painted this. And I still haven't heard back from them. So I guess we're not going to get that pigment information. Sadly, their site seems kind of broken. A lot of the links only work if you navigate back to the main page. And these are produced by Ningbo Schpirerr Painting Material Co. Limited. Super Strong is the factory name and Schpirerr is their brand name. And it looks like Schpirerr might make Muji products, which is weird but kind of cool. I felt like the first half swatched really opaque and gloppy, but I think that's a user error on my part because I think these might benefit from no pre-activation. The first half was swatched right after spritzing and were very gloppy, and the second half dried out a bit while I was waiting for the first half to dry and researching these paints, and they're handling a lot better. So I'd recommend you just add water as you go. They activate pretty quickly and they handle a lot better when they're not pre-activated. I feel like I saw this in the unbox and swatch for the folding palette too, and maybe I just forgot it. So for the second half, they swatched a lot nicer. They're not as gloppy as the first half. Both sets are pretty transparent though, but there isn't much noticeable granulation with these paints. The colors are bright and fairly saturated, so let's hope they stay this way through the other tests. So I just want to reiterate that it does seem like these don't really require a lot of pre-activation. They're pretty ready to accept whatever water is on your brush, because I noticed in the first half with these, it really glopped up on my brush, and in the second half, they had had a chance to dry a bit while I was waiting for these to dry. And they handle a lot better, and they're a lot easier to control, and there wasn't as much paint waste. So that's definitely something I want to keep in mind. I also used my wait time to do a little bit of research, like we kind of talked about. And I just want to reiterate again, in case I forget, that I did email them about pigment information. So hopefully in the field test, we can actually talk about their pigments, or talk about how we can't talk about their pigments, either way. So next I'm going to do the lift test. We want to see a variety of liftabilities, because theoretically we're seeing a variety of pigments, and then we're going to do the color mixing. The colors are all fairly lifting, although some, like alizarin crimson and indigo, are a bit more staining. So these are all fairly lifting. Some are a little bit more staining than others. We can see a little bit of granulation in here. This looks more like a black than a Payne's gray, and this looks more like a Payne's gray than a black, so they might have just switched the two pans. And there isn't really like a true, what I would call ultramarine blue in this set. We've got like a cerulean, a cobalt, and an indigo. That's not a deal killer, but it is a little more challenging for me to work with because I am so used to that ultramarine blue for my color mixing. In terms of the color, we've got a lot of very similar, like these two oranges are very similar, these two reds are very similar. But other than that, that's really the only area where I'm seeing a lot of overlap. And this is yet another set where those neutrals are just kind of weak. I am so curious what pigments they're using. Why are these neutrals generally so weak? So next I'm going to do some color mixing. We're going to do two types of color mixing. We're going to do optical and we're going to do atomic. Optical relies on glazing colors to get a secondary color. Atomic relies on mixing colors to get a secondary color. And since we have a nice big mixing surface, I figured we might as well use it. So I'm gonna, if you post it at the top, I've noticed it covers up most of the top row, but you can very easily post it to either side or the bottom without any real issue. While wet, colors mix easily and vibrantly. They do dry a little desaturated, but not too bad. It's easy to mix some good greens, oranges, and purples even without the ultramarine. Not quite so easy to mix a Payne's gray without a burnt umber or ultramarine, but I did mix a fairly decent facsimile. As for optical mixing, it was fairly easy to find the primaries in this set, although I think there are too many oranges and cool reds for a palette this size. Strangely, there's no ultramarine or dioxine purple, and the mauve is indeed a mauve. That kind of surprised me. So the more I handle these paints, the more I really can't help but wonder if Schpirerr Farben isn't white labeling these from Schpirerr. There's just so many similarities, and the more I dig, not that I am finding any kind of conclusive evidence, I mean neither company would admit that, but I do know that Schpirerr does a lot of OEM and ODM manufacturing, so it would not surprise me. And Shapiro Farben has a very limited range of art supplies, and there's just a lot of things that are kind of pointing that they might be the same thing. So they are, you know, my two sets are different size sets. This is the little 24 set here, and the Shapiro Farben set I have is the 48 set. It would be way easier to definitively say, yeah, they're the same set if I had, you know, the two 48s, but this wasn't available in 48 at the time I ordered it. So one of the things that really kind of gets me is the two larger palettes. The 248 palettes are very, very, very similar, whereas the 12 palette and the 48 palette from Schpirerr Farben look drastically different. Like the 12 palette kind of looks like a Mungyo palette, and the 48 palette looks like a Schipererr palette. So with that said, I do actually have the Schpirerr Farben pigment info, and I'm going to link that down in the show notes. But I mean, take all this with a grain of salt. Unless one of you guys can send me more definitive proof. I haven't been able to find definitive proof. There's enough differences and coincidences between the two sets that I can't really say it's a fact, nor would I want to. But we are going to compare them a little bit more head to head a little later on in the video. So I have one more test that I want to do. That is going to be our wet into wet test, where I use a block of cotton rag watercolor paper, saturate it with water, dip in the pigments, and then we see how they diffuse. And quite frankly, the wet into wet test has been really helpful in pointing out big old red flags and problem areas for lots of other brands. So I'm really glad that I've started doing it after that Mia field test burnt me, because it's honestly given me a lot of early information that really tells me how these paints will handle when we're doing the field test. These paints, especially the cooler yellows, are getting used up pretty fast. While still wet, they have a good color dispersion, even going kind of misty, which is nice, and granulation is more apparent when applied wet into wet like this. Colors are pretty vibrant while still wet, and we'll see how that changes as they dry. The colors also seem to readily intermix without totally blowing out. As they're drying, I'm starting to see some color fading. It might just be dispersing out, and possibly some rings of white around the indigo, which would be hugely disappointing because I really love Schpirerr's watercolors so far. I do like that these are granulating out a bit as they dry, but they also seem to dry far less saturated than the color was when it was wet. While some desaturating and fading is normal, you don't want to see a super drastic color shift. As this dries and hyperlapse, the white rings around the indigo become more prominent. So the wet into wet test has dried, and I feel like it reveals a lot, and I'm kind of disappointed by what it's revealing. So we are seeing a lot of, you see this white halo around what had been indigo? That is probably extenders and optical brighteners. The indigo should not have a white halo. Now, like the peachy color, the jaune brilliant, that could have a white halo. That's a color that's typically made with, you know, intentional inclusion of PW6. That's just, it's meant to be a more opaque color. Some of the blues are as well, but indigo is historically typically not. And that's just so disappointing because I really loved the other Schpirerr watercolor palettes that I reviewed. I don't know what's up with this one, but you know what? Even though I am going to end this video with a verdict, it's not the final verdict until we've done the field test, because as I have seen so many times with watercolors, it's really the field test that'll surprise you, and it'll really tell you everything you need to know. So all I really have left that I want to do with you guys today is talk about some comparable watercolors, and we can finally compare this Schpirerr set against the Schpirerr Farben set and a few other sets as well. So now it's time for us to talk about some of the other watercolors in the student grade showdown and how this particular palette stacks up against the rest. So I grabbed a few that these reminded me of. I don't have a lot of space, so they're kind of double stacked for now, but we've got the Mont Marte watercolor set. So this is an 18 color set. We have the Etcher 24 half pan set. We have some beautiful art over here that I shall move. We've got the Mungyo 48 half pan set. We've got the Meiliang pigments, the Pretty Excellent or Parrot watercolors as people call them. We've got another Schpirerr watercolor palette that I reviewed a while back. We have the much discussed Shapiro Farben palette, and I'm looking forward to that. And I grabbed my Sakura Koi palette so we could just see how similar those three palettes are. So I'm going to start with the actually in the student grade Showdown watercolors, since I have their swatches and stuff handy. And then we'll move on to some of those other watercolors. So that leaves us with the Mont Marte, the Etcher, and the Mungyo. So the Mont Marte come in a nice metal tin. I actually really like the tin with a really sturdy ring on the back. So in terms of build quality, the exterior on the Mont Marte is really pretty good. Unfortunately, on the interior, everything's pretty flimsy. These are extruded, kind of sticky, actually. That said, I think the Mont Marte are pretty promising, and I didn't see nearly as many optical brighteners in this set as I unfortunately saw in this particular Schpirerr set. I don't know what it is about this particular Schpirerr set, but I've seen a lot of optical brighteners there. Now, both sets have some really bright, vibrant colors, and you do have more options when it comes to this particular style of Schpirerr palette. You have the 24 and you have the 48. So you could get a whole 48 palette. Speaking of 24, we have the Etcher set, which I've said a few times, I think is just kind of overpackaged for what it is. However, the colors are bright and saturated, and you can make some beautiful color mixes. You also get some nice granulation out of them. And they're Payne's Gray. I think they call it something black, but it's more like a Payne's Gray. You can even see the blue. This is, you know, you do see a variety of granulations. They do have a standard ultramarine blue in there, as well as a burnt sienna. That said, I think this is an overpackaged, overpriced set. So while the watercolors themselves are good, I think what Etcher charges for these is a little high for what you're getting. I think it's going for around $45, which for a 25p, I think, given our options for a 24-piece watercolor set, it's a little bit much. However, they're very good watercolors, and I'm really looking to field testing these, and hopefully they will hold up to that. Now, unfortunately, I don't have the wet into wet test here with me right now, but I didn't notice any of the real issues that I was getting with optical brighteners that I saw with this Schpirerr palette. And then we have the 48-piece Mungyo set. I believe this was in the $35 to $40 range. We get some metallics in this set, so it's not, you know, directly the same thing. But as you guys can see, we get 48 full-size watercolor half pans in a metal tin. These are very saturated, but they are also very gritty and kind of grainy. And I think there are some hints, at least, at optical brighteners there. But to me, it's not as apparent as, I'm going to keep harping on this, I'm sorry, as when you go to apply indigo and it leaves a white ring around it. What is that about? So I would almost say these are comparable to the Mungyo. I'm kind of bummed because I really, really like Schpirerr in general, and this one was just kind of a letdown compared to some of the other Schpirerr palettes that I've reviewed in the past. So, speaking of, I don't have all of them here, but I do have the folding one. Now, I don't have the swatches for this one handy. This is a 56 color set. You receive far less paint per pan, because even though these are larger pans, they're very, very, very shallow pans. And Schpirerr seems to utilize this palette style in a few other palettes, but doesn't seem to sell these as refills, which is just such a bummer, because that's like my big complaint about this set, really. It does take up a lot more desk space. It doesn't have as many mixing surfaces, but you do get more colors, and I think this was in the $30 range. You also get some pastels. So here is the really, in my opinion, mind-blowing thing. This watercolor illustration was painted with this palette. I was able to do a lot of really beautiful diffused wet into wet. I was able to do layer after layer after layer after layer and really build up that color. I was able to handle these paints like I would professional grade, like Gansai style paints or Korean style watercolors or Chinese style watercolors without all of the optical brightener shenanigans that I fear this palette will throw. Now, they're made by the same company. They're probably using slightly different formulations. I'll give you that because, again, we got chiclets here. These are really, 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 really thin little slivers of paint. And here we've got, you know, extruded half pan. So they are probably doing something a little bit different with the binder, but these handled really well. I was hoping to see the same quality for these. Maybe these will really just surprise and impress me during the field test. You know, there's only one way to know, and that's to actually get to painting. But this illustration was created with this palette, which really took me by surprise. I kept forgetting I was working with an inexpensive student grade palette, not because, you know, the format tricked me, but because the way they handled, I just kept forgetting and I just kind of fell into enjoying watercolor. So I think also comparable are the Meiliang, the Pretty Excellent Pigments. I paid $45 for these at David's Art Supply. They're in the $30 range on Amazon. So I was supporting local, and I will stand by that choice because I do love David's. I don't mind a little bit of markup for the convenience. This palette has seen quite a bit of love. This is a 36 half pan palette. These half pans are smaller than your standard size half pan, but oh hey, so are these. This is made by the same company that makes the Paul Rubens watercolors, so this is like the student grade version of that, which I really like. These also handle, they punch way above their weight. Look, the neutrals in this set actually show up, as opposed to in this set not so much, or in the Mont Marte not so much. So I really like these. These are the ones I keep recommending time and time and time again. I was able to do wet into wet. I was able to do glazing. I was able to mix skin tones. I was able to mix some beautiful greens. I really like this set. I highly recommend this set. This is a great budget option. They do have the flimsy ring on the back, you know, for quote unquote plein air. And I say quote unquote not because I'm making fun of plein air, but because this is hard to balance. That's not going to be a comfortable plein air experience. And then we have the Schpirerr Farben. So yet another one that I don't have the color swatches on hand for. This one really surprised me because in the unboxing swatch, I thought it was going to be terrible. And I thought the Mia watercolors were going to be so much better. But, oh, look, they're like sisters. Okay, we've got the ridges here. The only thing that's different is the exterior screening. We have the ring on the bottom. Same ring on the bottom. Now, I know the pins inside are going to be different. I've already seen that, and some of the packaging and branding is a little bit different. Like Shapiro Farben does include their own swatch card, whereas the Artify rebrand did not. Both of them have the mixing palettes. This one came with a pad of really egregiously bad watercolor paper that I choose to ignore. Now, looking at them side by side, I thought that these cartridges were the same size. I thought the half pans in these were the same size, but now that I'm looking at the Shapiro Farben, they are using the same cartridge system, or it looks identical. They even have the same little, if I can get it out, there's like a lip on the paints. Oh, this is the punishment I get for being a sloppy painter. Okay, so you see it's got like a little, there you go, little bit of a lip on the side, and you can't put normal half pans in this palette because I've tried and it's just not gonna work. Now I forgot which side is up. I think that's it. Nope, that's it. Okay, well, while we have this out, why don't we pop out one of the Schipererr / Artify half pans. Now that I'm looking at it, it's looking pretty similar. Let's try to pop. Which one of you came out earlier? Okay, let's see if we can get this in here. They fit, but both companies could just be buying the palette. Oh no, no, don't get stuck. No. Okay, both companies could just be buying the palettes from the same vendor. I really don't think so. I think the best way to tell would be to pick a few colors that are in both sets and swatch them and just look for similarities. So these do come with much nicer water brushes than this set did. It also came with white gouache instead of 2 sponges, and instead of the yellow sponge, we do have a white sponge. So I don't know, you know, before I say goodbye to you guys, I am gonna do a little bit of a head-to-head swatching between the two brands just to see if I can notice the color similarities. And then finally, on that point, we have the Sakura Koi watercolors. Very, very similar design, but I know these are not manufactured by the same company, which is why I brought it up, okay? So a little bit different. This one nests a little bit nicer than this one nests. Similar opening mechanism. This one has little divots on the top. This one has these bands. Let's open it up. Almost identical from the inside, same layout. Now the difference is this has a cartridge system molded to the inside of it, whereas this has one of those cheap plastic liners on the inside, almost like they gutted one of these to put one of these in. So I know that these are not, that the paints inside are not made by the same company. And I actually like Sakura Koi. I've talked about them a lot. I used to use them all the time for convention watercolors, and I've reviewed them a couple times. So if you're interested in Sakura Koi, they used to be my best pick for student grade watercolors. I know some people really don't like them, but I found that they were really very suitable for what I was looking to do. My point though is that the inside of these palettes are really similar, but they're very different brands. So they're probably similar quality anyway. And it totally slipped my mind, but I meant to show you guys this. This is the field test for the Schpirerr Farben watercolors. So they don't quite handle as well as the folding Superior palette or the Meiliang pigments, but they handled a lot better than the Mia, and they really exceeded my expectations. There's a little bit of grittiness to them, and the skin tone isn't quite as nice as I would have liked, but everything else about this I'm really happy with, and I found them fun to work with and easy to handle. So I ended up really liking the Shapiro Farben paints, and if the Shapiro Farben are just a white label of the Superior that are inside this Artify kit, then I will probably like the Superior paints as well, and then it really just becomes a matter of who's got the better price point, who's offering the selection you want at the price point you prefer. This is what I'm going to do. I am going to swatch 3 easily recognizable colors from all 3 palettes side by side and let them dry, and hopefully that will allow us to be able to recognize, you know, who made what, some similarities, some differences. It might be a little bit more challenging with this big folding palette that likes to lock up, as you guys just saw. Since without a swatch sheet, these are all, it's just more difficult to tell what colors are which. I'm going to swatch these on the Blick Conrad watercolor paper. And I'm thinking definitely going for Jaune Brilliant. That's definitely a very quickly recognizable color. All of these are super staticky too. I also think maybe this cobalt blue color would be another good one to pick. Oh, I'm sorry, that is cerulean blue. Over here, I think they call it, when I look at them side by side, I don't want to have to like swatch around to try to find the correct color, and I am pretty sure that Shapiro Farben renamed some of these, so it's gonna take a little while for me to figure out which is which. But we're gonna do it, and we're gonna swatch it, and we're gonna probably not know anything for sure, but have at least a pretty good guess as to who belongs to who. All right, I'm gonna narrate this whole thing, walk you guys kind of through my process. So I'm gonna start with the easiest to identify color, Jaune Brilliant. So these two are both supposedly made by Superior. So theoretically those colors should be the same or very similar. I did not pre-activate anything since earlier we kind of figured out that pre-activation is not necessarily what's best for these. A little bit of wash out there, though not a whole lot. Let's grab the Jaune Brilliant from up here. Ooh, that's actually quite a bit yellower than this one here. Grab some more. Warms up a little, but not much. I actually like this a little bit better than that. And then in the Schpirerr Farben palette, they call that color Buff. Not necessarily want to pick up. Yeah, okay. Maybe the Shapiro Farben needs to be reactivated. I mean, part of me definitely wishes that these were the superior, because then I would have the pigment information for the superior, but the rest of me is hoping it's not, because it's just such a waste of time to review watercolors that are all technically made by the same company, and there's not really any formulation differences or palette differences. It's just a different name on the front. So it would be more interesting if these were actually a different company. I don't know, this and this are looking pretty similar. And this is by no means a definitive way of telling either. Let's grab some of their cerulean blue. And I think it's either this or that. Or it could be this. Always swatch all three. When in doubt, swatch it out. Start with the one I think it is. So now I'm looking at it, I'm like, oh, it could be that one. Yeah, this is a little greener. You know, at the end of the student grade showdown, I actually want to select some common colors like yellow ochre, ultramarine blue would have been a good one, and swatch them all side by side like I used to do with the professional swatches. That's not quite it either. Okay, I get one more pick. That's okay though. We're actually not trying to prove that these two are made by the same company. We're trying to prove that these two are made by the same company. Then I think this is the Shapiro Farben cerulean blue. So let's start with that one. Having all these palettes up and holding them up for you guys to see almost makes me feel like a makeup vlogger. These are not as quick to activate. I don't know if it's because the set's older and has been sitting out longer. And then I guess let's try their cobalt blue. Those are the only two in this palette that are kind of close to what we're looking for. Oh, that's not it either. Interesting. And, you know, frankly, they could have just chosen to include different colors when white labeling it. The goal of the palette could be different. This could be intended to be more like a Gensei style color palette, which is what I said in the initial review. This could be more like a field palette, but it doesn't really, the color selection isn't really a field palette color selection. There's a lot of reds in there. And then this could be a fashion palette, you know what I mean? It could just be down to how they selected colors. So their mauve, this is the Superior wearing Artify colors, mauve. Or this could all just be kind of me just playing around with paints and kind of a waste of my time. Which is okay. I'm not seeing anything immediately similar. I'm gonna go in with this purple. That's kind of surprising because red violets are a very popular choice And I'm not really seeing a red violet. I am seeing a nice opera rose though. This is gonna be, I was gonna say way too dark, but it's pretty light. So that is from the folding palette. I'm not more saturated. Oh. And then either, can y'all see? It's way off camera. Violet or purple red shade is a really close match for their mauve. I'm gonna go with purple red shade, and if that isn't it, then it's probably mauve. I mean violet. What am I? I'm just talking to myself at this point, I guess. That's pretty close, but that doesn't mean anything. Red violets are a popular color. Mostly at this point, I'm just kind of amusing myself. Those are pretty close though. So if the cerulean blue had been closer, and it's really not, I would have been way more likely to be like, yeah, I bet money that this is a white label. But I mean, Schpirerr Farben's not gonna tell. Where is their indigo? Okay, there is their indigo. Here is this indigo. It's a little difficult in this set to tell just because everything is in mass tone and I don't have a good color map handy, but I think this is their indigo. This might actually be like a very cool blue. This is why we make color maps, y'all. Yeah, that's a little, no, they're very close if they're not the same color. This one's a little more phthalo blue than that indigo there, but not a whole lot of difference. And then their indigo is right here. Oh, and that's really like a very cool, this is more like a true indigo than these two are. So I'm gonna grab the Prussian blue next to it because the Prussian blue, Superior, you let me down today. I'm gonna cheat and just chalk it up to, yeah, their Prussian blue is pretty similar to these two. I'm just gonna chalk it up to, when they do weird palettes, they do really well, and then when they do standard palettes, they really ride that middle of the road of adequate. And I'm gonna do one more. I think I'm gonna do sap green because really this proves nothing, but it might inspire some of you guys to dig a little deeper in ways that my Google foo has just fallen apart. I'll tell you what it is. For years when I would review art supplies, the company's website would pop up first and then other whatever related content would pop up. These days it's like Google related stuff, so blogs, YouTube reviews, including my own, which, I mean, you'd think I would be like, is this the right color? It's close. You'd think I'd be really happy about that, but I'm actually really annoyed by it because it makes it so much harder to find from the company information. And then with videos, and this makes me want to bring my blog back just in a different format. And Joseph and I have been talking about ways that I can bring it back on the website in kind of like a limited form. But videos are much harder to scrub for, like, if you just want to know the pigment information, like you want to know one thing, a video is not really gonna help you. And then another thing, Shapiro Farben has renamed, that says sap green. That doesn't look like no sap green. These two look more like olive. So that's another thing that kind of brings up a good point. Shapiro, even if these are the same watercolors in a different order, you know, slightly changed up for the white labeling, Shapiro Farben has changed the names on all of them. We're not seeing anything that has hue in the name. We are seeing shade, which is, you know, indicative of a hue, but they've changed up all the names. So actually matching these to get the pigment info would mean swatching everything, picking the closest one, and then just hoping, yeah, olive green is the sap green from the other two sets. hoping, no, it says olive green on the other side. Becca, why are you talking foolishness? Hoping that I grab the right colors, and that seems like a blog post kind of thing and not necessarily like a video kind of thing. So I will say this, there are a lot of color similarities between the Schpirerr Farben and the Artify / Schpirerr palette. A lot. That's not necessarily enough to say definitively, yeah, these are the same palette. Fortunately, there's some, well, I say fortunately, but not really. Like, even though I know both of these are Schpirerr branded, or well, this is an Artify branded product, but they're both manufactured by Schpirerr, there's enough color differences that you could be forgiven for thinking that they were not and that they're just similar. So, you know, for me, it's not anything definitive, but it's close enough for me to be like, yeah, probably. So I'm linking the Shapiro Farben pigment information for this palette because, frankly, the smaller 12 color palette they make looks more like a Mungyo product than like a Schpirerr product. It just looks very different in terms of how they're made. So that'll be in the show notes. If you want to try and figure out which pigments are which, please be my guest. And if you do, and you feel pretty confident with it, share it with us down in the comments below. I will pin it and I will much appreciate it. So unfortunately, unless one of you guys can dig up something more definitive, that's as far as I've got with that rabbit hole. So what are the pros and cons of this Artify branded Schpirerr watercolor palette? Well, let's start with our pros. Let's start with some good news. So I am a fan of these sturdy little plastic travel palettes. Why they don't look as profesh as the metal ones? They are sturdy, they travel well, they clean easily, and they have lots of mixing surfaces. They also don't jangle all up in your backpack, and they're not likely to set off security at the airport, which is honestly more important than you might realize if you're traveling a lot for cons. You can also easily mix clean, vibrant secondary colors, which, as we've seen in the student grade Showdown, isn't always something you can take for granted. That's actually kind of rare. And they stayed vibrant even as they dried, which was frankly kind of impressive to me. And these are quite affordable. I purchased these under the Artify label on Amazon, so they are very accessible for the price point. So what about some of the cons? Well, these get used up pretty fast. Even without pre-activation, they really glob up on your brush, which makes color control difficult and means you end up with a lot of pigment in your rinse water, which causes it to pollute quickly, and you're frankly just wasting paint like that. And they are shockingly similar to the Schpirerr Farben palette, although it's not one-to-one. I'd have to have the 48 half pan Schpirerr palette to be able, so when I say 48, they actually have different lines. This, I think, is part of their student grade line. I have the 48 half pan set from their professional line coming in, or their more professional line coming in. So what I mean is the 48 half pan set like this one, before I could directly compare them to the Schpirerr Farben palette and make that judgment. But if you have both, or if you've got the inside scoop, I'd love it if you let me know down in the comments below. So as an art supply reviewer, I don't like reviewing the same product over and over again under different names, and that's entirely personal. It's my own little vendetta against, everybody and their brother white labeling the same 3 products. So it's not like anybody else is buying 20 watercolor palettes. And then optical brighteners start showing up when you do dots of pigment into wet paint, like with the Indigo here, where it looks like it should be a pastel. So they create these little halos, and this does not bode super well for the field test, but we'll see. These might surprise me. What's my verdict for these Schpirerr watercolors? Honestly, guys, these disappointed me a bit. I don't think they're as good as the colors in the weird and wonderful folding palette that I just keep going on about. And it's not just because they're not leaning on a fun gimmick for support. However, the Schpirerr Farben watercolors surprised me, so these these might as well. I definitely put them above the Phoenix, Xylee W, and Giorgione watercolors so far, but they're probably not as good as the Meiliang or the folding Superior palette. But you guys know what? The field test is where we're really gonna find out just how well these handle. So I hope you guys will stay tuned for that. Click subscribe if you haven't yet. Click that bell notification so YouTube lets you know when new videos are out. And since YouTube is not always the most reliable, you can follow me for totally freezies on Patreon, because once a week I release a patron newsletter. It goes out to everybody where I recap everything that went live that week. So that's a good way to kind of stay on top of what I've been releasing. Oh man, y'all, that was kind of disappointing, huh? Especially after compared to my experiences with that Superior folding palette that I really liked. This one seems kind of iffy. It also seems shockingly similar to that Shapiro Farben palette, right? So even though it says Artify on the side, we all know that on the inside, where it counts, this is a Superior watercolor palette, and it looks so much like that Schpirerr Farben palette, I can't quite get out of it. Now I know this exterior is common, like Sakura Koi has a very similar exterior, and those aren't the same paint, so there is enough wiggle room for doubt, but the similarities between the two are enough for me to be like, which, if that is the case, I will probably like this palette about as much as I like the Schpirerr Farben palette, and pending field tests, my advice will probably be just go with whichever one is cheaper at the time. So from straight up swatches, we have really nice, bright, bold, saturated color, and they do mix quite well. The resulting mixes are really nice. But the truth comes out in the wet into wet test, where we start seeing a lot of scaling and rings of optical brighteners around the indigo. So that's not so great. I started the wet into wet test after I finished my first 3 student grade. Well, they're not really my first 3, but they were my first 3 in a set: the Meiliang, the Schpirerr Farben, the Mia, so 4 technically, and the Superior. After that, I started doing the wet into wet test because the Mia palette burnt me so bad. So honestly, the Schpirerr Farben palette might do this too, and I might just not be aware of it. So I am a little trepidatious about what the field test has in store for us, but unless one of you guys lets me know down in the comments that it is, and has some proof that this is the same palette as the Schpirerr Farben palette, in which case I will feel no need to field test it because I have already field tested it. I'm still gonna go through with the field test. Cross your fingers. Hopefully it performs more like the Schpirerr Farben folding palette and less like a very cheap student grade palette that I kind of am starting to fear it to be. Now, I have a bunch of other Schpirerr Farben, I have a bunch of other Superior watercolor palettes coming in. Some of them are higher quality than this, so hopefully those perform the way I've come to expect Superior to perform. And this is just a weird blip on the radar. Weird being, it's one of the only palettes I've reviewed from them that isn't weird. Although the other Superior palette that I have coming in is very standard in terms of format as well. So hopefully this was helpful, useful, and informative for you guys. This gave us a chance to check out a white label product, since this is an Artify branding, but a Superior palette on the inside, which really, like, this whole student grade showdown has really made me start thinking about OEM, ODM, and white labeling, and who's making which products, and why is it so hard for us to figure out who's making what and to get pigment information. So it's been a couple days since I recorded the meat of this review. I still haven't heard back from Superior, but hopefully I will get some pigment information before we do the field test, which would be great. But this certainly raises a lot of questions, and I really wish researching and investigating these products was easier. I wish there was a lot more transparency in the art supplies that we're buying. And that kind of brings me way back. Years ago, I applied to join it's NAMTA, I think it's the National Art Trade Materials Association, something like that. I mean, this is in the days of when I was keeping the blog and didn't have a YouTube channel, and I actually applied a few times, and their membership fee is like $3,000, and I asked if they would consider having an artist rate, because that fee is meant for industry professionals who have a company, you know, covering those costs, and I don't. I just want to know what's in the art supplies I'm buying. And they seemed really surprised that an artist would care about that, which is mind-blowing to me. I actually need to like get back on nagging them again, because I would like to join. That's like, I'd like to attend that craft materials, that big convention, like in a post-COVID, if we ever get there, world, that I know some of the other crafters on YouTube would go to, because that seems really cool. Unfortunately, I would be the annoying one asking all of the annoying questions, like what pigments are you using, and who's actually producing this watercolor palette, and why are you charging $40 for it when I can get it on AliExpress for $20? So they might not like me so much over there. But yeah, this kind of leaves me with mixed feelings. I can't necessarily recommend it. I would recommend you get the Schpirerr Folding 56 pan palette or the Schpirerr Farben palette over this one at this particular time. But I really appreciate you guys hanging out with me. Hopefully this was helpful, useful, and informative. And I think this kind of information is really important, because having art supplies that you like, that you enjoy working with, and that you don't have to fight with, helps you make art a habit. And that's one of my big goals here on the channel. So thank you guys for hanging out with me and helping me unbox and swatch these Artify / Superior watercolors. Bye!